Excellent. All right, so good morning, everybody. I am just going to put my screen up for a moment as I introduce myself and the panel. Okay, so this is, and just in case you've clicked on the wrong Zoom link, this is a multi-layered approach to combat social engineering. It's a kind of a long descriptive statement for something that is actually quite scary if it's not done correctly. And our panel will get into that, but I'm sure many of you have heard about the newly Twitter hack, the newly they caught the people that were behind it, a group of young people that were behind it. And it seems that although sophisticated, was not super difficult. So this is really important. We have a stellar panel moderated by Debbie Briggs, featuring Katie Ledoux, Rob Mitchell, and James Slaby. Before we get started, I want to thank our security community sponsors. It is with their help that we're able to do these types of programs and that we've been able to continue doing them throughout COVID and to very quickly convert from in-person to virtual. That is Deloitte, and our newest sponsor is Sonatype. They just joined last week, so we're really excited about that. And then our global sponsors. It is those companies that really help to support all of our members' membership and programs throughout the year. I am now going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Debbie Briggs.
Good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Deb Briggs. I'm the CISO of NetScout Systems. Oops, let me just hit share. And I just had a couple of opening slides that I wanted to cover before I actually engage Katie, Rob, and James. The good thing is the type of meeting we have, there is a chat window, and Sarah is actually going to be monitoring this because I have lots of questions. I always have lots of questions and comments. But at the same time, we want this to be about you and what your questions are. So we definitely want to engage you guys. Because of the size of the meeting, I think it's probably best if we chat, and Sarah will repeat the questions. That way we don't have to worry about muting and unmuting everybody. But basically what today is really focused in, as Sarah said, on social engineering. And, you know, I pulled this image off the internet this morning, and it's really what are the parts of your security program. And, you know, I think this is called an isosceles triangle where all the parts are exactly the same. You know, if we were drawing this sort of to scale, you know, you wouldn't do it in a triangle like this, because the weakest part of this triangle is your people. And that is, you know, what social engineering gets after. So, you know, I always think of people as human firewalls, and depending on what size your company is, your human firewall can look like this. And there are people that are coming and going and leaving and not paying attention and, you know, focused on their real job and not so much on security. But any one of those people, you know, clicking on a link, letting someone in, answering a question, could be what brings down your company or opens an event or an investigation or something that you could spend weeks on. And so what we're here today to do is sort of talk a little bit about that. So I am going to stop sharing, but this is really about a multi-layer approach to social engineering. So I will say, Sarah, I am not familiar with GoToMeeting, and I just need to stop sharing, and I don't know how to do that. Did I do it?
You succeeded.
I did it for you.
Oh, Thank you. I guess we should have practiced how to stop sharing. So first of all, I'm going to turn it over to Katie. So Katie, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? And more importantly, my first question is to each one of you is, what is your most memorable social engineering story? Something you've heard, it could be the Twitter, recent headline, can you sort of just talk us a little bit about yourself and then your social engineering story?
Yeah, absolutely. I am Katie Ledoux. I'm the Senior Manager of Trust and Security Governance at Rapid7. Rapid7 is a security software and services company, but I am on the internal security team. My personal most memorable social engineering story was many years ago when my manager had us do a phishing drill for the whole company, and then one separate targeted phishing drill for one sales guy who had annoyed him in some way. And actually, even though we made him a targeted phishing campaign, someone tipped him off and he was ready for it. He didn't fall for it. So
very nice. James, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us your, most memorable social engineering story?
Sure. I'm James Slaby. I'm the Director of Cyber Protection at Acronis. That's a fancy outward-facing term for a product marketing guy. I've spent about half my career in product or vertical or solutions marketing at various security vendors, and the other half as an industry analyst at places like Forrester and Yankee Group. If you don't know Acronis, we're in the business of what we call cyber protection, which is a combination of traditional data protection, backup and disaster recovery, and now a whole suite of security services. So if you're like a small or medium-sized business and you're looking for kind of one-stop shop for that, talk to any of our 5,000 partners around the world. They're using our technology to deliver that suite of services in an as-a-service fashion. My favorite phishing story is probably from one of my recent industry analyst gigs. I was covering security and cloud services for HFS Research, which mainly focuses on the business process outsourcing business, but I was writing about cloud services and security for them in those days. And we had a client whose CFO had gotten a late night email like 1 o'clock on Sunday morning from the CEO saying, look, I really need you to send me a file with all our employees' social security numbers right away. And he was groggy, maybe had had a few glasses of wine. He sent the file. And the next thing they knew, the company's employees were getting income tax returns filed on their behalf and the refunds being redirected somewhere else. So clearly it was not the CEO who had actually requested that file. And that CFO lost his job as a result. You get a surprise message from your boss at 1 o'clock in the morning on a weekend. That's probably a good time to get your antennae up.
Thanks, James. And Rob, I'm going to pivot over to you. Can you introduce yourself to us and tell us your, social engineering phishing story that's most memorable to you?
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Rob Mitchell, Manager of Messaging Security over here at Great Horn. Great Horn, we're a cloud-native email security solution which detects and remediates a lot of these phishing attacks on which we're going to talk about today in social engineering emails. So when we talk about memorable social engineering things for me, right, I have a million of them. The AP Twitter hack back in early 2000s was a good one for me. I like to see what happened around that, right? It's an AP sent out a Twitter which literally crashed the U.S. market, and it was done by an adversary army. So that was a pretty good one. Another one that I like to go to is a phishing attack, right, where somebody received a voicemail claiming that their sister had been in a car accident and they needed to call this number back, and money was Western Union out, right? So these types of social engineering attacks are not only handled via email, but across the spectrum of devices that we're using now.
So Rob, I have some questions for you. So, you deal a lot with, phishing campaigns and email compromise. And I'm actually, Sarah, going to share slides again because Rob had a couple of slides. And I think it's no surprise to any of us that phishing is one of the most easy way and the way that's used in to get into our networks. And so Rob, you had a couple of slides, and I think it really sets the stage on how people are being successful and why people are using phishing.
Well, yeah, phishing remains, as the title says, and there's a couple of images missing there. But phishing remains the number one threat vector when in using all these social engineering breaches. From what we're seeing is breaching is involved, 32% involves phishing, and out of those 32%, 29 involves stolen credentials, right? So somebody sending you an email with a URL or an attachment, and you're clicking on this malicious URL, not really realizing what's going on. So when we talk about the recent Twitter hack, it all started with an email, and I think it was Katie that said it was an Okta password reset. So it's interesting, right? So people are sending out password requests, missed voicemails, cryptocurrency extortion types of emails. So we're seeing, around the spectrum of, type of email attacks. So Debbie, if you can switch to the next slide, we'll talk about a couple of those attacks, right? So when we're talking about phishing, we're talking about two types of attacks, right? I look at them at two types. There's the technical attack. And when we talk about technical attacks, we talk about those password resets. Something that's having you log into your webmail account, or log into Facebook, or log into Twitter, or log in here, log into your bank account. Somebody's attempting to log in somewhere, and all they need is your credentials. So the technical attack starts with the URL. It starts with an attachment. It starts with something that wants you to do something. And then there's a non-technical attack, right? The non-technical attack is you receive an email from a partner or a coworker asking you to do something on their behalf. Hey, can you send me these? Send me the user's social security numbers, or can you go run to the store and grab me a gift card? So there's two types of these technical attacks that are involved with social engineering. And the next slide here will show you an example, right? So this is what we would consider a technical attack. The user receives this email that says, hey, you have 4 voicemails pending, which is important. The work staff now is remote. It's highly possible to miss a phone call while you're at home, right? So I could step away, grab a cup of tea, come back to my my little office set up here in the corner. Oh, I have voicemail, right? So you click on this URL, not really realizing what's going on underneath it, and that's also important because your user base is now, their monitor size has shrunk, right? Maybe they're checking email on their phone. They really can't hover over the URL to see if it's malicious or or suspicious. What happens is they click on the URL, it redirects them to this Outlook web access page. As far as the user is concerned, this is no change. This is no different than any of the other processes that are going on. They're at home. They realize hey, I might have to log in to listen to these voicemails, and at that moment, the compromises happen. Right now, the user has your Outlook username and password. They may have access to other internal components of the system. And then there's a non-technical attack. The non-technical attack is very specific. This one came from Kevin O'Brien, who happens to be on the phone, who happens to be the CEO of Great Horn. So I was sitting on my desk one day, and I received an email from Kevin. Kevin wanted me to know, he wanted to know if I was available to help him out with an urgent task. Now, given the space that I'm in, given the experience, I'm able to say, all right, I know this is not Kevin because I can look over and see Kevin sitting in the office. So me being me and having fun with it, and this is, what I did here is not recommended, right? We don't recommend that you reply back to the scammer and to the threat actor, right? So, but in my case, I remove my signatures, I removed any kind of trace, and I go back and I banter with them a little bit, right? And I ask him, hey, Kevin, what do you need? What do you need me to do? And at that point, Kevin wants me to go get some Apple gift cards, $500 face value. He wants me to get 4 of them, very specific, $2,000. Please go to the store and get these gift cards for me, and then scratch them and send me the picture of the code, and we'll be all right. So, obviously I tell Kevin, it's around Christmas time. As you can see, it's December 11th. $4,000 from $2,000 to me wasn't enough. I wanted to raise the stakes personally. I replied back to the guy saying, hey, I think we should get more, right? But it just goes to show it's not always sophisticated. It's not always a malicious payload. It's not always going to be something that's, physically, it's not going to have you do anything crazy, right? This one is just a quick task from Kevin O'Brien. And if you look, right, the from address, it looks like it's from Kevin. The reply to address, what you see there is post.cz. Very important. Most users, I would say non-technical users, which is why the attack is so popular, would think that they're helping out and doing a favor, and then would just, go out and buy these gift cards, and get $2,000 is down the drain. So, I'm in a good position where I have access to millions and billions of data points. And we're able to distinguish good from bad and build profiles around some of these attacks. So I think when it comes to social engineering, phishing is definitely where, and it's the number one. It's going to continue to be the number one threat vector.
Hey, I figured it out. So I'm going to pivot to you, Sarah, in between James and Katie, if you can let us know if we have any questions before I have some questions with Katie. So James, we've heard about, phishing and how people can use phishing. What other, social engineering attacks or things do bad actors try to do to get into our companies?
So that's a great question, Debbie. I first wanted to say that I did the exact same thing that Rob did. I know it's not recommended, but I got what was obviously a scammer, and I wound him up a little bit. I responded, it's like, actually, my expense limit is like $20,000. You want me to get more? And I think that scared the guy off because he figured out that I was too good to be true. There's a I don't want to focus too much on edge cases because, classic email attachments and links to poison websites is still clearly the vast majority of phishing incursions. That's easily the most popular attack vector. And it's not hard to understand why. I mean, just myself alone, Acronis is, we're a global company. In the course of a day, I'm processing messages from Outlook Mail. We just recently moved from Slack to Mattermost. That's a big source of messages. But I also use WhatsApp. I'll use Skype. If I'm hosting a virtual event on cybersecurity issues, which I do a few times a month, I'm often communicating with a different back channel to my speakers and panelists, so I can quietly tell them that they're still on mute or whatever. And so I'm processing hundreds of messages a day, and it's my job to be kind of efficient at that. And so even though you might train me super efficiently at being wary of this and use one of the solutions out there that sends fake phishing emails to see how many employees you can snag with it and say, look, you shouldn't have clicked on this. This is, be more wary. We're all just trying to do our jobs, and between, fatigue or just the sheer volume, you're eventually going to, somebody in your organization is going to click on something. That said, I still think it's fun to look at some of the edge cases around phishing. I remember writing a report at my last research company about the Stuxnet attack and how the first way that they got inside this Iranian nuclear facility where they were processing ore into uranium for their nuclear power and weapons programs was dropping free USB sticks in the parking lot that people found and said, oh, look, free terabyte USB, this is great. and plugged it into their machine. And of course, that downloaded the first surveillance software that was the beginning of this sort of multi-layer, very sophisticated, advanced persistent threat attack. And so nowadays, I warn people, be careful of like vendor swag that you get at events. Okay, so we're not doing the RSA conference live this year. You know, my company's annual cybersecurity event in Miami is going pure virtual, I'm afraid. But when we get to the after time where we're back doing those live things, you know, be careful of getting like a cool USB cable, because that too can now be a vector for malware to get onto your machine. The other story that I always think we've only seen a couple of examples of it, but I think very soon it's going to be very much a real thing, is a technical amplification to these non-technical type of attacks that Rob alluded to. In this case, voice phishing. You get a call or you get a voicemail. It's from your CEO. He says, look, I need you to wire $250,000 to this partner of ours, and I need you to do it within an hour. The thing that makes those attacks much more convincing these days is that you can deepfake a person's voice in just a matter of hours. So for example, you could go online to YouTube. I don't encourage people to do this, but you can go onto YouTube and find recordings of a webinar that I gave to my company's managed service provider partners on how to protect their customers against ransomware. And there's hours and hours of that material of me presenting online. So there's plenty of raw material for an audio deepfake artificial intelligence engine to create a simulacrum of my voice that you can basically just feed a text file to, and it will spew out audio that sounds exactly like me. The video part of it is still harder to do, takes a lot more sophistication and processing power, but the audio is something that you can, with enough raw material input, you can generate a really good simulator of my voice in a matter of hours. And the tools don't require you know, great technical sophistication to use. So I suspect we're going to see a lot more of that kind of AI enabled voice phishing coming down the road. The bottom line from my kind of perspective, again, Acronis doesn't have an anti-phishing solution. But we are in the business of providing a lot of other cybersecurity issues. So, you know, my advice always is take every step you can to make your employees aware that these kind of attacks are coming their way. But understand at some point you're going to get compromised. Somebody's going to click on something that they shouldn't. Maybe they're admitting ransomware into the company network. So that means that you need to have broad-based measures to defend yourself against the kind of potential attacks that can get introduced here. And you definitely need to think about incident response, planning for incidents, and actually rehearsing those drills. And this goes beyond just the technical response, but also a kind of a communication plan, how you manage communicating an incident to regulators, investors, partners, customers, because you don't want to be responding to the reporter from the Wall Street Journal as your first kind of public communication after you've been breached.
Thank you, James. Katie, so you've heard James and you've heard Rob speak about phishing and about other ways that you can compromise the human firewall. Do you have any other stories or any, you know, recent events you want to talk about before we actually, were there any questions, Sarah?
Not a question, but Kevin did. Kevin, do you want to just repeat what you said?
Yeah, sure. Just saying, and it was during the point that James was making around USB ports and the risks that they pose where people pick up USB keys or cables or whatever at trade shows. You know, a modern form of this is you go drop a cool looking USB key in the parking lot and people will inevitably take it and plug it into something. But even 20 years ago, I was mentioning that in the at stake days, and I was part of the original at stake team, we talked about getting into server rooms and we wanted to get physical access to hardware. Easiest thing to do is throw on a UPS uniform and take some empty cardboard boxes, and someone would let you into a building, especially if it was toward the end of the day, which is even better because those people weren't there anymore. They'd hold the door for you because it was such a normal looking thing. Social engineering plays on that, and it's not just phishing, even though that's a primary cause.
Okay. Katie.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, it might sound, I mean, obviously it happens, so it's not that crazy, but it might sound crazy that someone would pick up a USB drive and plug it into their computer. But I actually have worked at a security company where someone got a USB drive in the mail from a vendor and plugged it into their computer and literally like sent a joking message to security being like, LOL, it's so funny that I'm like plugging this thing into my computer. And we're like, wait, that's like really like, it's actually not. I mean, it was fine. There wasn't anything malicious on it, but just the, like people will do those things. And so I think in addition to, I have a lot of mixed feelings about security awareness training and its effectiveness. I think it's really important to measure the effectiveness. And I also have, I have a tough time really simulating a phishing attack and putting someone through, because if you're doing it really well, you're kind of putting them through an emotional roller coaster. And I have a uniquely difficult time doing that to users right now. I kind of feel like they've got enough going on to not have to feel like I'm trying to hit them with like a gotcha moment. So I think it's really great to also consider, what are we doing to technically make sure that this message isn't even getting to them? If we look at the USB example, is there a way that we can, with minimal disruption, if everything we're doing is in the cloud anyway, set all of our USBs to read only, and then the person who goes rogue and plugs that thing into their computer, nothing's happening there anyway. So we're just always thinking about, where can we take the shift the burden from the user to a technical control, to avoid that situation where we have to be like, that dang user, look what they did. It's like, well, what could we have done to have that be something that CTO didn't have to, or CFO didn't have to think about when they got an email at 1 o'clock in the morning on a weekend? Like, how could we have prevented that from happening in the first place?
So I'm gonna open it up, Sarah. I know we don't have any questions yet, so I'm gonna open it up to Katie, James, and Rob. A question that I have for all three of you is, people are always going to be the weakest link to any security program, and Katie alluded to it. Where can we lean on technology or on process to actually, sort of shore up the people? And what have you seen either in your current company or at a previous company that you have seen be really effective? Without naming names, is it a technology, or did someone do an incredible job at some sort of awareness or training that you could share with everybody, that they could sort of walk out of here and say, that sounds really interesting, I hadn't thought about that? Anybody want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, when we talk about advanced phishing and advanced threat detection, remediation detection, right? That's where Great Horn specializes. That's what we do best, right? So we're able to isolate from lines, reply to addresses. We're able to look at the body of the email. We're able to identify all these indicators of compromise. We're able to highlight this to the end user, to admins, to anybody internally who would need access or visibility into the email flow of the company. Right, so if you're looking for suspicious URLs with a combination of a suspicious return path and questionable subject line, and the body looks a little weird, and you also have never received an email from this person before, right? So that's what we're doing at Great Horn, is we're able to highlight these points and these indicators of compromise and make it visible for people to remediate them and clean them up after.
James, did you want to add to that?
I sure do. First of all, agree with all of the advice of my colleagues on the panel today here, particularly like Katie's point about, do what you can to help the poor end users. We all know that they're the weakest link, but, as security professionals, we can't, the fact that we have like an easy fallback person to blame doesn't mitigate our responsibility to find everything we can to do something about it. If you think about solving this problem as a risk management exercise, the way maybe we should about any kind of security decisions, cyber or otherwise, within our company, it's useful, I think, to put some priority on executives as targets. I can tell you, having worked regularly with my CEO, mostly on virtual conferences since the lockdown, I'm not always comfortable giving him advice. He's a very brilliant and kind of an intimidating figure. He's this tall, burly guy with a shaven head, like Bezos on steroids. The guy makes me a little nervous. But those are the people that you really should spend some time making sure that they have the awareness. I alluded to this former client of mine, CFO, being attacked. I also think of a fairly recent story about, I think it happened last November, the Pathy company, which is a old French movie studio, and they're kind of like the Lowe's cinemas of Europe as well. They also own distribution. And the senior executive at their Dutch affiliate got emails that said, this is the CEO of the French parent company, and I need you to start wiring some money to this affiliate of ours. And $24 million later, they figured out that they were being scammed, and it was done with some sophistication. But the real root of the problem was that Pathy did not have a consistent method of authenticating and authorizing wire transfers around the globe, and the attackers kind of exploited this fact. Among other things, a simple measure that you want to focus on is to make sure that anyone that's got serious authorization to wire monies has been trained and is continually trained on some form of offline authentication. You definitely don't want to do it just by email. That, for example, something like a Google Authenticator app might be a useful second authentication factor. Voice authorization, with the caveat of the story that I told before, which is that increasingly impersonating voices will get easier and easier to do. That also suggests that where possible, you should probably reduce the social media footprint of your executives where you can. Obviously, that's a tough balancing act to strike, since you want your kind of promote the expertise and awesomeness of your senior leadership, but maybe not so much the CFO and some other individuals who aren't involved so much in kind of marketing the expertise and capabilities of your company, to kind of reduce them as a target for the kind of surveillance that precedes most social engineering attacks.
Thank you. Katie, I'm going to pivot to you and I'm going to change the question. I think one of the things that's top of mind for everybody is the Twitter hack. And so can you just tell us a little bit about what's been in the news, but more importantly, do you ever, or does anyone here ever take sort of the headline news, especially when you can tie it back to the human firewall? And do you use it as a learning moment? And do you ever find, for anybody who speaks to their board or their audit committee, do your board and audit committees want to hear that same thing? Like, are we protected
Oh my
from
God,
this?
Debbie, this is my dream question.
Oh, sorry.
I love it. I love it.
But I think that's what everybody's interested in.
Yes, I completely agree. The timing, I mean, we had planned this panel before the Twitter hack, I believe. And
Very timely.
I thought it was such incredible timing where I have to assume every single CISO's next board meeting, they're going to get the question, well, could what happened with the Twitter hack happen to us, and how do we prevent that from happening? Just a very high level overview of what I have read so far about the Twitter hack, or at least the parts that are the most relevant to what I do. I think my guess is that a lot of boards will, if there's one thing that they can kind of like glom onto here, it'll be, well, are we doing social engineering training, and are we doing phishing drills? And that was indeed part of this attack. It seems like it started with an IT impersonation. There was some phishing. It seems like there was some SIM swapping where an attacker got some phone provider carrier to assign them someone else's phone number. And my personal favorite is the creation. They use Okta for MFA, it seems. And the creation of a fake Okta login page to capture credentials, which, not to brag, was our last phishing drill at Rapid7. So we did this for this exact attack. But I think, well, the easy thing to focus on is, are our employees ready to get that fake IT call? Like, Twitter has 5,000 employees. I don't care if you do security awareness training every single day, someone, if they are that big a target, someone is going to fall for that attack. So it goes so far beyond that, where, once they got one person's information, then they had to pivot and use that access to get someone else's access who had, like a privilege escalation. And James, you made the point too of, well, who has the authorization to make these large financial transfers? Well, who has the authorization to get into the admin panel in Twitter that gives you the potential to take over someone's account? 20% of the company is what I read last night. 20% of their company. And that, by the way, is not weird. Like, talk to your average SaaS company about how many people can access customer data, employee data, other sensitive data, and it's probably really high. And you fix that with a combination of access reviews, which Twitter says they do, and they said, oh, okay, well, we do access reviews, and everyone has that access in order to do their job. If 20% of your company needs that level of access to do their job, you probably need to make your access permissions a little more granular, because I have to believe they don't need access to all of that. Maybe you only have one permission setting that's like, either you have all of it or you don't, and you need more refined role-based access control. Other things around, if there is a social engineering attack and you are a victim of malware, do you have a backup strategy? I think it's just, the point is, it is so multi-layered that what makes me sad is that I think a lot of the CISO to board conversations are going to be, when's the last time you did a phishing drill? Okay, go do another phishing drill. And then they're going to come back next quarter and be like, did the phishing drill? And the board's going to be like, great.
Yes.
And that hurts me. End of rant.
So what you're saying is a CISO or someone in security, we need to use these opportunities for when there are headlines, to use it as, an awareness campaign to employees, but also to the board, and educate them beyond. It's not just running a phishing campaign. Yeah, it's, if the Twitter hack was multi-layers, and it's still going to be evolving. We're going to hear more, and we're going to learn more in coming weeks and months. So use that as an opportunity to sort of say to your board, it's not just, that someone fell for a fish. That was the beachhead or the toehold, and from there they were successful at doing all these other things, and those are just as important.
And this is why Debbie is a CISO, because she can take the rants of people on security teams and turn them into coherent lessons learned. I'll get there. I will get there. It will take me a few years, but
so
that's it.
So James, I heard you laughing and doing a lot of nodding when Katie was talking. Do you use headline news as an opportunity? Should your security team use headline news as an opportunity to do remedial security awareness training? What should we be doing when we have those opportunities to educate executives or boards?
Yeah, it's a huge part of my job. So I spend a lot of time, as I mentioned earlier, working with our partners. All our technology gets to market through resellers and primarily managed service providers. So I'm constantly trying to educate them about how to protect themselves and protect their customers. And ransomware is the giant threat that we see from a malware perspective. And, as it happens, we've got a really awesome behavioral-based anti-malware capability that's really highly rated in detecting and stopping ransomware attacks after they've gotten, this is all your other defenses have failed. Your security awareness training hasn't taken with one person. They're taking advantage of one of the 8 billion sets of credentials that were compromised in 1 month earlier this year. And one of the things that I tell them is, look, obviously you don't do the fall back on the cliche of trying to terrify your customers and prospects with security threats, but certainly educate them, take advantage of the sort of case studies that are coming out every other week of some giant ransomware attack, and say, look, the business of creating and distributing malware and other threats like this has been completely industrialized. It's not a cottage industry anymore. Super profitable. Ransomware alone probably generated something like $8 billion in revenue for the bad guys last year. And understand that it's only going to keep going that way. You think of it as their sophistication in terms of development and distribution as comparable to like a Salesforce.com, right? They now have an army of who are effectively low-tech distributors out there who are using free kits that they got on the dark web to get into the business of using phishing emails and other techniques to get ransomware on your systems. And so you need to take steps against it. And the fact that there's headline news, again, I'm forever updating that presentation with the latest. TravelX earlier this year was a giant one. They got taken down for nearly a month by ransomware. There's a new municipality or state government that's getting attacked in the US that way. It seems almost weekly. Cognizant just got nailed with it. This is a big IT services outsourcer. So absolutely say, look, we're not trying to fearmonger here, but you do need to be aware that these kind of attacks are now part of a highly industrialized and sophisticated business, albeit evil, and you need to take steps so that you're not going to be the next one in the headline news.
Thanks, James. so Rob, I'm going to pivot to you. Katie, bravo for doing a phishing campaign with the fake Okta reset or login. I have asked my team to, because my board seems to be really focused in on ransomware, and James rightfully so. But one of the things that I asked them to do is our next phishing campaign, I would like all the campaigns, because we usually do 5 different emails at the same time, because if we do the same one, they all tell each other, don't click on the link about this, and it skews my stats. But I asked them to go and investigate real actual emails, defanged of course, that were successful in ransomware attacks, and send those to our employees, right? And if they click on the link, don't just put up the, oh, you fell for a phish, here are the 5 signs. I said, I want this, if they click on that link, I want it to be a dark banner. I want it to be blacks and reds. I want it to be like, if this had been real, right now your machine would be completely locked, and it would be, pivoting and locking all your neighbors. And so I want the message to go from, I don't want to say happy, but more, hey, informational, remember these tips, to something dark. And if this, this was a real ransomware, we defanged it. But if you had clicked on it, this is what would be happening right now. And with the stat at the bottom, James, like you said, that says, oh, last year, ransomware bad guys made $8 billion. That's why these attacks keep happening. Because, stop, look, and think, or whatever I want to put before you click. But Rob, you work for a company that does email blocking, and so are you guys, like, what should we be telling? What that gets back to, we need the technology and process to support the weaker human firewall. So what should we be turning around and saying to our vendors at this point about ransomware is continuing to grow? Well, if we can't, and you can't stop everything, because there's 0 days, and every time we block a hole, the bad guys punch 1 or 2 other additional ones. So we've got to train our end users. But what can we be saying back to the security teams and the security vendors that we have about what they should be doing? Because if I'm thinking about it, I would hope that there are people at the security vendors thinking about, hey, someone's going to run a campaign of all defanged ransomware emails to see, how much of a potential problem do they have. So Rob.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. We should all be considering and looking at, how do we protect URLs? How do we hide these suspicious links behind a preview page, right? Give you an example of what's going to happen when you click on this link. Here's a preview of the destination page, where you're able to then test your credentials. Is there anything funky behind this page now, right? Is it going to try to steal my credentials? What is the risk behind this login page, right? So it's not, and then you're looking at payloads, right? And then you're looking at attachments, which, there are malicious attachments on which you want to block, but you can't block everything. So you want to insert banners in there. You want to say, hey, there's a lot of things about this message doesn't seem right. You should probably contact the security team, where you're enforcing some of the internal behaviors that, the internal IT team is talking about, right? Where everything can't be done via email. You want to raise these red flags. You want to encourage the users to you want to have that light bulb go off, like, hey, maybe I should contact the security team, right? There's something behind this destination. There's something behind this banner. There's something behind this suspicious page preview. So it's, we're in an industry where not everything can be blocked. These attackers are getting really sophisticated with the type of campaigns that they're launching. They're piggybacking off of known good mailers and things along those lines. They're relying on authentication. So they're saying, hey, maybe I'll sign up for one of these mass mailers for $1.50 a month. All right, and they're coming in, they're blasting things out 0 days. They're spinning up new domains. So you can't block everything, right? But you definitely want to raise some real-time user awareness, right? So it's not always a phishing campaign that you're going to be aware of. But if you receive an email with a banner saying, hey, there's there's definitely some red flags with this message. You should probably reach out. So it's not a block all type of world, but it's real time user awareness, which is also important.
So we have about 7 minutes left, and I like to be aware of the time. Sarah, just let me know if there are any chats or questions that people have.
Well, yeah, so we've pivoted a little bit, but I think it's still there as something Kevin said, is that they're saying 40% of InfoSec practitioners they've interviewed say that they have to remediate, pull things from mailbox on a weekly basis. So that's 10% higher than what they saw in 2019. So is there a discussion to be had about the shift from perimeter to in-the-moment control, as we saw in endpoint network in years past?
So
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was
Please.
just going to say, this is something that I've been talking about for quite a while. My old colleagues at Forrester had kind of codified it as a zero trust kind of approach, but it's also kind of our perspective as a vendor as well, is that the perimeter model felt dated to me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and that you really need to focus on the data as the kind of the center of your universe, both from a basic data protection standpoint. You know, if you get hit with a ransomware attack, at a bare minimum, you should be able to restore to a recent uncorrupted backup. But increasingly, that should be the focus of your whole sort of multi-layered cybersecurity approach, right? So from the context of phishing, it's about email filtering, maybe URL filtering, but also to managing and patching vulnerabilities, right? Having a kind of a programmatic way to address known vulnerabilities. Behavioral stuff, behavioral countermeasures are also going to be huge. That'll protect you against 0 days. It also might have helped Twitter in their recent hack to see that they were getting a lot of traffic from sources that they normally should not see it from. And obviously they were doing some lazy things around, like keeping their Slack environment secure. Apparently the attackers did a lot of early surveillance by busting into a company Slack account and chatting to people there, impersonating another employee.
And the credentials were pinned to an internal Slack channel, which is not where we store credentials. We store credentials in a password manager.
Yeah. Yep.
Which, by the way, I am like not roasting Twitter. Like all this stuff is insanely hard. Insanely hard. Like all the things we're talking about, we're like we're rambling off these like, oh yeah, patch everything. Like, oh, have an incident response. But like each of these things is a massive undertaking to do correctly. So believe me, I don't think I'm doing better than Twitter, but it's just, you know, look for passwords in Slack and then tell them to put them in LastPass. It's the thing to do.
Debbie, you're muted.
My phone keeps ringing, so I have to keep muting myself. So we are down to about 3 minutes now. So I'm going to ask each one of you, if I was on this event and I was new to security and in managing security, and you know, and social engineering is really important to me. It's hot. It's something I need to do something about. Katie, I'm going to start with you. What one piece of advice are you going to give me and tell me to start with or be aware of?
I am so sorry, but it is access management. And I know that that is the most boring, most arduous part of security. But I just, you know, a lot of this other stuff obviously matters, but if you are a real target, they're gonna get to you, and the best way to minimize the amount of damage that they can do is by making sure that people don't have more permissions than they need to have. I would also say, from the compliance perspective, if you're trying to, like, I don't know, sell the business side of this, when I see people failing their SOC 1, SOC 2s, which makes it really hard for them to sell their applications, it's always access management. So there's a business case for that too.
Okay.
We actually, fun fact, had to rip an application out of our SOX environment because they failed their SOC 2 because their access management was terrible. So you want to talk about losing customers, it's a good way to do it.
Okay. It's on my list of things to do. Rob, what piece of advice are you going to give me? You're muted.
I would say trust nothing and question everything. You know, you're receiving emails by the minute. Like I said, you're on your phone, you're on your tablets, you're traveling, you're walking around, you're making a cup of coffee, you're watching TV, you're listening to music louder than you normally would in the office. You know, use your internal gut, use your instinct. You know, trust nothing when you look at an email, when you look at a URL. All the brands are being hit. It's not just Twitter, it's Amazon, it's Dropbox, it's Google, it's every major brand you can think of is a part of a daily attack. So trust nothing and question everything, I would say, when it comes to some of these things.
It's on my list. James.
Really just endorse what Rob and Katie had to say. And in the spirit of focusing on the obvious, if mundane and onerous task of access management, focus on privileged users and slap multi-factor authentication on accounts that, when compromised, will be able to do serious damage. That's again a kind of a, it's impossible to do everything you need to do at once. I know our partners' customers struggle with that whole vulnerability scanning and patch management treadmill. No one can keep up with it. You know, the average time between a vulnerability becoming known and people patching it is something like 108 days. I think the last good external survey I saw. So everyone struggles with that, but there's some low-hanging fruit that you can pick. And I would say MFA on privileged user accounts is a good one to pluck.
Perfect. I will add that to my list. So, Sarah, I think we were at the top of the hour. First of all, thank you very much, James, Katie, and Rob, for doing this panel with me. I intentionally stayed away from COVID and what we were doing in this pandemic times. I think what we've talked about with social engineering gets a little more focused and a little bit higher risk during this time, but I think so many people have talked about it. I stayed away from it. So Sarah, thank you for scheduling this and hosting us.
Thank you all so much. This is phenomenal. As I said at the top of the hour, I know that we always have people asking for these recordings. So we are going to share this out broadly. I will send you out the links so that you can share it as well. There's some great insights here. I know that people probably think this is a boring topic. But when you really get into it, it is not, and it's important. And I think that this hour flew by. It flew by. So I know that we could keep talking about this for a really long time. And I appreciate all of your time. I know you're very, very busy. So I hope you all go back. You have some great phishing, testing, tricking of your people, and enjoy the rest of the day. So thank you all. And thank you again to our sponsors, Deloitte and Sonatype. Really appreciate all of your.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.